like to thank you all for being here and coming back after lunch. It's always a risk, right? You never know if lunch was that good or that bad that the rest of the day goes south. But thanks for coming back. Thanks, UE Systems, for allowing me to talk about a topic that's both been a passion of mine and a really frustrating experience over my career. And I'd like to extend a special thanks to Senator Campbell for his talk this morning. Just some really great stuff, and I think you'll find that what I'm going to talk about, and pretty much everything you'll hear in all of these presentations throughout the course of the conference here, are subsets of what Senator Campbell talked about this morning. And so just a great keynote speech. And if you take that passion and that patriotism back with you when you leave here, if you don't take anything else back, if you take that back to whatever state or nation that you came from, it will help you to be successful. So again, thanks, Senator Campbell, for that. And let's talk a little bit about maintenance costs and why my maintenance costs don't go down. The challenges of balancing maintenance budgets, dealing with finance, and how your financial system is structured, how your maintenance system is structured, what software you use, where you bucket costs and expenses. They vary greatly from business to business. Even within my own company, Cargill, they vary greatly from business unit to business unit. And of course, across the width and breadth of the globe, there's a tremendous variation in how things get calculated, if you will. One of the keys, though, is the journey that we're all on, and wherever we are in our journey toward reliability, we're expected to provide a value, and we're expected to provide that value in both reliability of our assets and effective use of funds. So typically the discussion goes along the lines of, we'll be able to reduce maintenance costs. Surely, for those of you who are familiar with the UE Systems products, you can justify the purchase of that type of equipment fairly easily with cost savings. But a lot of those savings, and typically where those savings start, is in the energy realm. And that's great, and it works, and I'm a firm believer and proponent, and I've done that. But as you get into more and more predictive technologies and use of that technology and other technologies across the width and breadth of your plants and your facilities, things tend to get a little bit fuzzier. As Doug said, I spent 8 of my 10 years with Cargill in the beef business. And the last 2 years I've been in the de-icing technology business unit for Cargill. Prior to that, I did a 20-year stint with GE in the chemicals in silicone products. And I spent a little bit of time working in some light and heavy manufacturing also. So I've done both operations and maintenance work there, and got a little bit of feel for some differences in how things work and how things move. And it does move. This is the Cargill de-icing facility in Cleveland, Ohio. Just spent a couple of seconds talking about that. It is a rock salt mine. Basically, 3 major products: de-icing salt, used on roads in its raw form as it comes out of the mine. It's crushed and spread. And I will tell you right now that we care a lot more about your families than your vehicles. So if you want to rag about de-icing salts ruining your vehicle, it's keeping you alive. So I'll throw that pitch in there. It's one of those balancing acts. Chemical salt, salts used in chemical processing, is another product, and then our third product is animal feed in the form of both loose salt and salt mineral combinations, and salt blocks and mineral blocks. So pretty basic. The mine itself has been around for a little over 20 years. It's just under 1,800 feet deep, and it extends 4 miles out under Lake Erie. It's about 4 miles wide and about 4 miles out under Lake Erie. So transportation becomes an issue. The amount of work time you have becomes an issue, and of course, maintenance costs as it relates to how you get maintenance done out in the face is an opportunity. This particular mine just again was awarded notoriety as one of the safest mines in North America, and it's kind of interesting in that it has three modes of transportation. So we can ship by Great Lakes freighter, we have rail spur, and we ship by truck. So there's a lot going on the surface as well as underground. So what keeps savings in dollars off the bottom line? A couple of things. The cost of capital, the cost of goods, labor, and the cost of savings. And while I use the word cost there, it's really an opportunity. And so what I'd like to do is explore each of these at a little bit greater depth. And when I refer to the cost of capital, and we'll start there, I'm talking about what's typically considered non-base capital. So I'm not talking about your base capital or expense capital or capital that goes into the direct replacement of equipment. I'm talking about the addition of new equipment, expansions, new product introduction, things of that nature. So things that you typically weren't maintaining today that you will be maintaining tomorrow. So there's no such thing as a free lunch. To kind of get us grounded, I want to give you a baseline. This is a 10-year plot of maintenance costs for a business unit, and that business unit consisted of six plants at the time this data was taken. And if you take a look at this is total maintenance dollars, and it's not a bad story. It's kind of flat. Maybe a slight increase, but those slight increases typically don't tend to be too much of a concern. Now, for those of you who are doing maintenance budgets or have responsibility for maintenance budgets, right now, probably, depending on when your fiscal year starts, you're either wrapping up your fiscal year, so you're in the end of your fourth quarter and you're going, my goodness, I thought we were going to save more money than we did. Or if your fiscal year starts in January, you're just about halfway through your second quarter and you're going, yeah, I'll make it up in the third and fourth quarters. Or you're doing really well, but it's not over yet, right? So we have all these variations. But by and large, you'll experience a little bit of everything that we're going to talk about here today. So anybody dispute that this is not a bad maintenance trend if you're not doing anything other than maintaining your equipment? Yeah, you do? You don't see any sign of improvement. Yeah, well, good point. Are you in operations? I'm teasing you. No, that's okay. But typically, that's what I hear from operation managers. I don't see any signs of improvement. Do you see any signs of maintenance dollar reductions here? Do you see any signs that we've done anything to make our maintenance any better than it has? Need more data. All right, well, let's look at a little bit more data. During this 10-year period, at about year 3, we started to introduce a proactive maintenance program and started to introduce predictive technologies. And if you look at it now and you go, oh yeah, well, look at that. So we started our predictive and proactive maintenance venture here. We saw a little bit of increase in cost, initial startup costs, and the identification of defects there. Things started to get a little bit better here in this year. It's okay, so maybe we're getting ahead of it. And then, well, we added more predictive technologies. We started doing predictive technologies on more assets. We found more defects. So I can explain all this away maybe with all of this information. But again, by and large, we're not seeing that reduction in maintenance costs that you would tend to think you'd get from adding a proactive maintenance program, identifying your defects early on, eliminating defects where possible, and a more proactive approach, right? Well, that's because of this. This is the implementation of non-base capital that I just talked about during that period. And if you can see the significant increase in non-base capital, now this is after the removal of any obsoleted assets from the system too. So this is all extra dollars in non-base capital, extra equipment, extra assets. As a matter of fact, over that 7-year period, approximately the same amount of new assets, new processing and production equipment as if we built an entire new plant. $180 million, which is about the average for those 6 plants as replacement asset value. So we did a whole lot more equipment maintenance with generally pretty quiet costs. So lesson number 1, you must account for the additional costs of non-base capital. If you're not calculating that non-base capital, those new assets as they come in to your facilities, and you're not calculating the maintenance that goes along with them, and you're trying to budget based on the standard, what did we do last year? Yeah, let's call it good. Or what did we do last year? Let's try and knock 5% off of that. You're not going to catch this, and you're going to be surprised by the fact that suddenly you've got maintenance costs that don't seem to go down, and you've got additional equipment you need to maintain. So again, please account for any additional costs and increases in equipment. Watch out for that non-base capital. The cost of goods kind of falls into 3 areas: materials, supplies, and inventory. And I'll talk briefly right now just about R&D a little bit, because that kind of ties right in with that non-base capital. A lot of times, if you're doing R&D work, you're doing experimental work, you run into situations where, as maintenance organizations, you're asked to trial equipment. A lot of times this equipment comes in free. Hey, we're getting a free loaner of this new piece of equipment. We want to try it. Well, there's no free lunch, because you've got electrical costs, you've got mechanical costs. You need to hook this up. You need to unhook it. You need to prepare it for shipment back. All of these little subtle nuances that go on during research and development that, again, typically aren't budgeted, but show up at the end of the day in your maintenance costs. And they're not directly related to the assets that you're maintaining. They're directly related to this research and development and potentially that non-base capital. Another thing to watch out for is, at least in my business units, demolition costs. Demolition costs are not capital. They're not capitalized. They come out of maintenance expense. So if you've got X number of $1 million in capital to spend, and it's on a brownfield site, and you have to pull equipment out, or you have to reroute, or you know that old building over there that hasn't been doing anything for 20 years and you haven't had to touch, they decide they're going to use that building and put a new line in there. Typically maintenance costs go into that. So you really need to pay attention to those when it comes into that capital and that research and development. This unit right here is a Caterpillar Elphinstone 7200 loader. It's kind of the mainstay for our mining facilities in Cargill de-icing. And the tires average about $40,000 per tire. If you take a look at the 5-year trend in use versus cost, the total cost of tires rose slightly over that 5-year period. Rubber prices went up over 50% during that 5-year period, and thanks to some good work by our purchasing and procurement people, we managed to keep the tire costs from going up too much, but they did go up 18%. So again, if all you're measuring is cost, you're looking at cost, you've got an increase in tire cost here, which means you spent more money replacing tires on that unit. Interestingly enough, if you look at the tire usage during that same period, we reduced tire usage significantly across the 3 facilities. And we did that with a combination of proactive maintenance, monitoring tire pressures, monitoring tread wear, operator care activities, better training and education for the operators, some housekeeping activities and things of that nature. So again, this whole proactive approach caused us to reduce the consumption of tires fairly significantly, but at the end of the day, the cost went up. So if you're only measuring cost and you're not taking a look at what are you using as far as materials goes, you can get into a situation where you can't explain away why your maintenance costs haven't changed. So lesson number 2, make sure you're tracking materials as well as cost. You can get in, like I said, you can get into that situation where you're doing a good job, you're showing reductions, and yet your prices are staying the same or going up. And some of that stuff you're just not going to have control over. Some of it you're not even going to be able to foresee. a sudden decrease in, or a sudden increase in rubber, as an example, can have an extremely negative impact, yet you're doing better through your proactive approach. Okay, materials trends, parts and supplies. If you take a look at this graph, and I apologize, I know it's a little busy, but we'll walk through it fairly quickly. Supply trend, relatively flat for supplies over a 5-year period in this business unit. And you can see there's even been a decent reduction in material use. So that all looks good, except we've got a significant increase in our inventory values. I put this line in here because this was a standard national inventory trend for the U.S. over that same 5-year period. So you can see the inventory value going up significantly in these particular facilities. At the same time, the national trend is down. This is an indirect result in a lot of cases of your capital and your non-base capital. You're bringing new equipment into the facility, and typically you're bringing parts in to support that equipment because in many cases it's new. It's either new versions, new technology, or technology you haven't seen in your particular facility before. So what do you do with that? You get parts. Where do we typically get our idea of what we need to have for inventory? Vendors, yeah. And vendors, right, they're interested in making sure that their equipment's well maintained and you keep it running, so what do they typically suggest? Yeah, exactly. Get some parts. Make sure you got enough parts to keep this thing running. They don't trust you to maintain it properly, even if you have a proactive maintenance approach, so they're trying to help you out as best they can. Right, wrong, or indifferent, doesn't matter. Typically, that's where you start. And if you don't control that in any other way, shape, or form, you're going to drive your inventory level up, everything else being equal. So it can be significant, and it's something to watch out for. There are a couple of other instances and reasons why inventory levels rise, and we'll talk about those in just a second. Obsolete inventory is the results of that other equipment that you either had to tear out or you're not using anymore because now you've got all this new whammy-dine technology, and you're focused on making sure that stays running because that's the future of the business, right? But the cost of managing inventory ranges from 12 to 32% of its value annually. Numbers are highly disputed, so you can take that with a grain of salt if you want, but there's a cost associated with maintaining inventory. Written off inventory costs typically, and again, typically go to the maintenance bottom line. Where did those parts, what are we going to do with these parts? We're going to write them off. What were they for? They were for maintenance of equipment. It's going to the maintenance bottom line. If you're going to write inventory off, usually now, it goes to the maintenance bottom line, which is also a reason why we tend to hesitate if things aren't going really, really well to write inventory off, right? So we can just keep it on the shelf, especially in a mine where it's never coming back up to the surface. We can just put it someplace where we're not mining anymore and forget about it, right? No, because nobody ever forgets where they put stuff, especially maintenance guys, right? So if you do write it off, it's going to go to the maintenance bottom line. If you're not prepared for that, your cost is going to reflect that. And then the other thing I'll add is economic order quantities usually aren't. They usually aren't economic at some point in time if you are truly on a proactive maintenance journey and you're progressing in that direction. So how do you build this excess and obsolete inventory? MinMax settings. Might have been a good idea at the time. A lot of times they'll come from the vendor. This is what MinMax settings we recommend. Well, they recommend those MinMax settings for people who are buying their equipment. They may not know the operating context in which you're using that equipment, so it may or may not be applicable. You've got to really do that. If you're using RCM type of activities or FMEA types of activities where you can identify the need for parts and the typical potentials for failure, you can get a little bit of a jump on that. If you're not and you're going with straight recommendations, you're going to get this MinMax setting based on best guess. And again, as you progress in your maintenance journey, and it is a journey, those things will change. If you're not monitoring it, if you're not staying on top of it, if you're not looking at these types of things, at least on an annual basis, it's going to have a negative impact. Auto reorders can generate excess inventory. Canceled work orders when the material is already purchased, especially if it's purchased on request type of material where it's not in inventory and you're bringing it in. Once it gets there, if you don't use it, where does it go? Somebody said it. Inventory. Yeah, it may go to inventory, or it may go in the hidey hole, or it may go in the boneyard, or it may go into one of those other places where you all know there's stuff kicking around that somebody's going to use someday. And boy, we'll be glad we have it, so we'll just put it over there. Leftover capital, here we go again, right? So capital comes back to haunt us again. Well, we had 3 extra control valves. They stand about this high and they cost about $7,500, $100 a piece. We'll put them in inventory. Then we'll have them. Whether you need them or not is academic, but that's where they go, right? You're not sending them back. You brought it on capital, right? I was under budget on, the engineer will tell you, I was under budget on my capital request anyway, so there's no sense having to deal with sending these back and paying a restock fee. Just put them in inventory. Duplicate catalog numbers with inventory against each. We see this a lot, especially when our purchasing and procurement people are trying to do a good job of helping us by identifying new vendors, better suppliers, cheaper suppliers, or more economical suppliers, right? It's got a different catalog number, gets a different asset number in your maintenance management system or in your inventory management system, and the next thing you know, you've got 2 or 3 or 4 identical bearings from different manufacturers, or different bearings from different manufacturers that do exactly the same thing. Not adjusting economic order quantities, we talked about that, and we'll get into that in just a little bit more, but again, the economic order quantity is usually the quantity at which you get a price break. If you buy 1 of these, it costs you this. If you buy 5, I'll give you a 10% break. So again, purchasing says, I'm going to stock these. How many will you use? I'll use 10. Well, okay, so I get an economic order quantity break, 10% off. If I buy 5 at a time, that's what I'm going to buy. Great idea. Okay, good baseline. If you're not paying attention, you're not tracking it, it's going to come back and bite you. Ordering too far ahead of work execution, especially in inventory. If you're doing work and you're planning work and you're doing a great job of planning and kitting your supplies, a lot of times as soon as you either reserve that part or you draw that part out and kit it, it reorders automatically. Do you need it reordering automatically? You may not. Again, if nobody's looking at it, it's coming. It's a computer-generated thing, or it's generated by the efficiency of your purchasing people who say, I took one off the shelf, I got to get one back on there, because way back when, I used to get yelled at because I didn't have stuff in stock, so I'm going to have everything I need in stock all the time, and if 1 is good, 2 is better. I'm sure you've all seen that Progressive commercial, right? More is better. Every time I see that guy, I want to slap him. Stop telling the kids this. It's not right. Changes in technology that make equipment and parts obsolete. Goes without saying, we're talking about obsolete inventory. But if you don't get rid of it, you've got to count it. You've got to maintain it. You've got to utilize that floor space for it. And then writing off inventory and not getting rid of it. Once again, you can write it off the books. You could say, I don't have it anymore. But if it's there, it needs to be maintained. Worse, if it's truly obsolete and it's going beyond its useful life, now you run the risk of introducing additional defects into your equipment because you're putting parts in that are not best quality. A lot of things have age, shelf life, they age, and again, you can keep them there forever, but there's a price associated with that. And premature failure is not a price that most of us in this room are willing to pay. So that's all the, I got my fingers wrong here. That's all of the ways we build this inventory. How do we get rid of it? Well, we use it, right? We use parts, and that's okay. We return them to the supplier, and typically we pay a restock fee for that. We can sell them either to our sister plant or another plant in our business unit or another plant in our company, or even to the company down the street if they're looking for it. We put them up for sale on the open market. You can get rid of it that way, or you can scrap it. the bottom line is, as you increase your reliability, that faucet of outflow for those parts tends to decrease. So your inventory tends to build. And again, if you're adding capital or your economic order quantities aren't shifting, you're going to end up in a situation where it's costing you more to maintain inventory. And that may negatively impact your maintenance budget if that's included in your maintenance budget, like a lot of places are. So, the cost of inventory, right? Does this look familiar? Anybody ever? I'm not your plant, but have you ever seen something like this in somebody else's plant? Oh yeah, absolutely. So getting into the cost of inventory a little bit deeper, if you look at it again, a 5-year trend. If you're using 10 belts, you're inventorying 5 with a minimum reorder quantity of 3 and an economic order quantity of 5. At the end of the first year, you will have consumed 10 belts and you'll have 8 left on hand because it went down to 3, you ordered, you used those, went down to 3 again, you ordered, and you end up with 8. So going into year 2, you've got 8 belts, you're going to use 10, and the same thing applies. Your balance will be 8. Year 3, no change. Year 4, now your maintenance, year 3, you only use 8 belts, but you haven't adjusted your minimum reorder point, so you end up at the end of the year with 8 belts. Not a big deal. I used 8, so that's okay. But year 4, you're using 5 now because your maintenance efforts have improved. You haven't changed your economic order quantity, and you haven't changed your minimum reorder point. There you are with 8 back on the shelf. But now you're only using 5. So your belt's going to start to age, even if you've got first in, first out inventory and you're doing a really good job of rotating that stock, your stock is sitting on the shelf longer. And then year 5, if you've gotten even better, you're only using 3. You change your economic order quantity to 1, you change your minimum reorder point to 1, but if you don't change your economic order quantity, what do you end up with at the end of the year? 8 more belts. And you haven't used but 3. So again, they get older, the chance for failure increases, the chance for obsolescence increases, and you're buying belts you just don't need to buy. Then there's the hidey holes, the not on the books inventory, the stashes, the laydown areas, all of these places where there's parts that, well, we used them once, but we only used it for a little while, or I've been meaning to fix that, or I was going to send that motor out, but I kept it, and all of this stuff that goes along with not managing your inventory well. And like I said, if you're taking your inventory off the books, that's good. But if you're not getting rid of it and you're allowing that type of material, that less than quality material to be used, and I know we were in a pinch and there's 101 excuses for why we do it, but it's costing you money. It's going to impact you negatively when it comes to your mean time between failures. It may even impact your mean time to repair. If you've got guys who would rather spend time to dig through piles like this, and this is a gross exaggeration, but to drive the point home, to find what they need rather than have the part available at the point when they need it and doing the right work at the right time, it's going to impact you negatively. So, lesson number 3, manage your inventory or your inventory will manage you. The cost of labor. Demand for skilled labor continues to increase. We've all heard about the bubble and we've all heard about the demise of some of the skills training in our high schools and even in our colleges, right? Trade schools are fewer and far between than they used to be. Shade tree mechanics are fewer and far between than they used to be. Back in the day, it was nothing to see somebody tearing an automobile apart on the side of the street, right? It doesn't happen anymore. The technologies have advanced, and interest has changed dramatically. So the demand for skilled labor continues to increase. Benefits costs escalate at a more rapid rate than salary. And Senator Campbell talked about that this morning, right? He talked about a couple reasons why that happens. And then the cost of labor, the cost of labor does not necessarily reflect labor usage as a result. So, the true cost of labor, if you look at, again, I included the national trend in this one, which is the lower line here, for salary. So that's the national trend for salary. And for this business unit over a 5-year period, you can see they didn't do too bad a job of staying close. But when you load that salary up with benefits, you can see the dramatic rise in the true cost of that maintenance individual, every maintenance individual you have in this particular case, right? So usually when you're doing budgets, even if you're sharp and you say, you know what, I need to account for that 3% raise that's written into the contract, it's not 3%. It's not 3% because you've got all this additional cost, and a lot of times you don't know what those costs are going to be. The only way you find out is when you see the first month's P&L and you've got this insurance cost as an adder on your labor, and it's twice what it was last year, and you go, well, where did that come from? And they go, oh, well, our insurance costs went up. All right, so you've got to watch out for that when you're looking at labor, because just calculating that 3% increase in and saying, hey, you know what, if I cut my budget 3%, because I am getting better, and that's what I'm managing to, and you get that added cost, you get that loaded cost at the end of it, you're going to be in for a surprise. Now, interestingly enough, during that same time period I just showed you, this was the result of straight time hours and overtime hours. The overtime hours, I used a 10 multiplier just to get it on the chart. But you can see there's been a relatively constant positive decrease in the number of labor hours. But it's not reflected in labor costs because the costs have escalated more than the reduction in labor hours have indicated. So, lesson number 4, make sure you're trending hours as well as dollars. Otherwise, you're going to get into that situation where I thought you were going to cut my labor. I thought you were going to reduce labor. I thought I was going to get out of that 12 to 15% overtime and get down to the 7% overtime that Senator Campbell was talking about. You got to trend hours because there may be things that you don't have direct control over that are going to hit your budget, and if you're not prepared for it or you're not prepared to discuss it, you're going to end up having to listen to the plant manager give you a hard time. So the last thing I'd like to talk about is the cost of savings. Anybody recognize this guy? Who is that? No, it's not Santa Claus. Looks like him, but it's not. And he thinks he's Santa Claus, but he's not. Who? Uncle Sam? No. No. No, he'd have a lot more money if it was Uncle Sam. This is your plant manager. This is your plant manager with all that money that you saved in maintenance costs. And he's giddy like a schoolgirl. He's happy because he's got money he wasn't planning on having. So how does that work? What's he going to do with this money? He's going to give it back, right? He's going to pat you on the back and say, you know, we had this great productivity increase because of reliability, and we actually saw some maintenance savings, and so I'm going to give that back to the company, and I'm going to make sure that I reduce my overall plant budget by 10% next year because of that. Nah, maybe he will, but I doubt it, at least not at first, until he gets used to the idea. What he's going to do is he's going to invest that. He's going to put new carpet down in his office, right? He's going to fix that window that's been fogged out for 10 years. Maybe he's going to increase the size of the guard shack. He's going to do all these things that don't show up anywhere but in your maintenance budget, right? Because you saved this money. He's going to spend it. And where he spends it is in this a place like this called plant site, right? And if you look at this, this is huge. This is like the second largest cost at this facility. And everybody has miscellaneous RM, so we're accounting for that too here, and I wanted to show you that. There are always things in a maintenance budget that are either not expected or don't fit into that I'm tracking my assets. But if you're tracking your cost by assets, that number is going to be a very, very small percentage. This plant site business, that's nothing more than money that should have been somewhere else or should have come from somewhere else, or it might have been a capital project, or it should have been budgeted like that in the first place. If you look at site number 2 here, I'll get this straight eventually. You can see the miscellaneous RM is a little bit higher, but there's no plant site. And this is a much more mature facility where they're tracking asset costs specifically by the asset and no surprises. So lesson number 5, track your cost at the asset level. You want to be able to tell your plant manager, you want to be able to tell your business unit leader, you want to be able to tell the president, CEO, you want to be able to tell your people, your maintenance, your craftspersons, and your operations people where that money was spent, what assets it was spent on, and that's going to give you not only a good idea of when your assets are reaching the end of their useful life, where you have opportunity for correcting some issues that are causing excess cost, especially if you're comparing one asset against another to see where those costs balance out and what the averages are. But it's also going to uncover these things that ended up as maintenance expense dollars that really had nothing to do with maintaining the operating assets in your facility. Some of it has to happen. There is miscellaneous RM. We talked about that a little bit, but there's a danger to take that money and invest it into other portions of the site that are not directly impacting your maintenance on your assets. So track your cost by asset, and you'll be a lot better off when it comes time to budget. And you can budget based on your asset costs, and then if the plant manager decides he wants that slush fund and he wants to add to your maintenance budget, that's fine. But you can track it and you can show anybody that wants to look at it what your true cost of your equipment is and the true cost of maintaining your equipment. So, summary account for non-base capital improvements. There's a lot of money that floats around in and out through research and development, demolition, excess parts. Track your volumes as well as your costs. If your parts volumes are going down and your costs are not because of things outside of your control, let people know. Look at this. I started here because we did things like monitoring tire pressure, monitoring tread wear. We did some training and education. We've reduced the number of tires we consume. Manage your inventory. It will eat you up. Trend labor, hours as well as dollars, because you've got loaded and non-loaded, and you need to know what those are, but you may not have control over all of it. So manage your hours and track your costs at the asset level. Great. Well, thanks very much for the time and the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Thank you.